Superhero weaknesses are often more ridiculous than their powers. From a hero who loses their powers if they say their own name to the most powerful being in the universe being weakened by a green rock, we're counting down the top 10 most illogical superhero weaknesses in comic book history. Kicking off our list is Captain Marvel Jr., the junior counterpart to the mighty Captain Marvel. This young hero boasts an impressive array of powers, mirroring those of his namesake. Flight, super strength, and even the wisdom of Solomon. He's a formidable force to be reckoned with, a pint-sized powerhouse ready to take on any villain. But here's the truly ridiculous part, the Achilles heel that makes his heroic life a constant tightrope walk. If he says his own name, Captain Marvel Jr., he transforms back into his ordinary, powerless self, Freddie Freeman. Can you imagine the sheer awkwardness of that? Picture this, you're in the midst of a heated battle, dodging laser blasts and trading blows with a supervillain. You need to coordinate with your fellow heroes, perhaps shout out your name so they know who's flanking them. Captain Marvel Jr. to the rest. Poof, you're just a kid again, standing there in your civilian clothes while the bad guys have a field day. Talk about an awkward situation. It's a weakness that constantly threatens to undermine his heroic efforts, turning potentially epic moments into comedic fiascos. He's essentially one misplaced introduction away from being completely useless. Coming in at number 9 is Banshee, the mutant with a sonic scream powerful enough to shatter steel. This powerful ability makes him a valuable and often crucial member of the X-Men, allowing him to use his voice as a devastating weapon against all sorts of villains, from sentinels to alien invaders. He can unleash concussive blasts, create sonic force fields, and even fly using his unique vocal power. But here's the tragically ironic thing, if Banshee gets a sore throat, he loses his powers. It's like a world-class opera singer losing their voice right before a big performance, or a stand-up comedian suddenly going mute. Imagine facing off against Magneto, the master of magnetism, a villain who can manipulate metal with his mind. You're ready to unleash a sonic scream that could disrupt his control, but then, scratchy throat. Suddenly, you're reaching for a cough drop instead of your sonic arsenal. Talk about a bad case of laryngitis at the worst possible moment. This weakness makes Banshee's effectiveness incredibly precarious, turning him from a powerful mutant to a vulnerable team member with the slightest tickle in his throat. It's a constant threat that hangs over him, making every battle a potential vocal gamble. Number 8 on our list might surprise you, especially given the sheer power this individual wields. It's Gladiator, the Strontian warrior, a being whose abilities are so vast they're often compared to Superman himself. He can fly at incredible speeds, possesses super strength capable of moving mountains, and is practically invulnerable to most forms of attack. He's a cosmic powerhouse, a force of nature. But here's the truly bizarre catch, the Achilles heel that makes this near godlike being surprisingly fragile. His powers are inextricably linked to his confidence. If Gladiator starts doubting himself, if even a flicker of insecurity creeps into his mind, he becomes weaker. Imagine, the guy who can punch through planets, who can withstand the heat of a star, gets taken down not by a supervillain's energy blast, but by a little self-doubt. It's a psychological vulnerability that seems utterly incongruous with his physical might. He could be facing down a cosmic entity threatening to devour the universe, but if he hesitates, if he questions his ability to prevail, his strength diminishes, his invulnerability falters. Someone get this guy a pep talk, stat! He needs a good therapist, not just super strength training. It's a weakness that makes him a fascinating and ultimately flawed character, a reminder that even the most powerful beings can be undone by their own inner demons. At number 7, we have the Human Torch, the hot-headed, flame-engulfed member of the Fantastic Four. This fiery hero can engulf his entire body in flames, turning himself into a living inferno. He can fly through the air like a human rocket, and he can project blasts of intense heat and fire, making him a formidable opponent. He's essentially a walking, talking, flying bonfire. But guess what? This being of pure flame, this master of combustion, has a truly ironic and utterly bizarre weakness. He's vulnerable to asbestos. Yes, that's right. The guy who can create and control fire is weakened by a fire-resistant material. It's like saying water is weak to a waterproof container, or a bulletproof vest is vulnerable to bullets. The sheer incongruity of it is almost comical. Thankfully, asbestos isn't as common as it used to be, having been recognized as a dangerous health hazard, but the fact remains that this fiery hero, this walking embodiment of heat and flame, could be taken down by something you might find in old building insulation. It's a pretty bizarre weakness for a hero whose entire shtick revolves around fire, a vulnerability that just doesn't make logical sense. It's a testament to the sometimes strange and often humorous logic of comic book weaknesses. Landing at number 6 is the man without fear, Daredevil. Blinded as a kid, Matt Murdock developed super senses that let him see using sound. But here's the kicker. Loud noises can completely overwhelm his senses and incapacitate him. Imagine, the guy who takes down ninjas and mob bosses gets taken out by a car alarm. And it's not just sounds that can take him down. Strong smells can also overload his senses. Talk about a sensory overload. It's worth noting that this weakness isn't always consistently applied. In some versions, like the Ben Affleck movie, rain actually enhances his radar sense. But in others, it's a major vulnerability. Coming in at number 5 is the king of Atlantis, Aquaman. He can breathe underwater, talk to fish, and swim at super speed. But take him out of the water for an hour, and he's basically a fish out of water. Seriously, the dude who commands the ocean loses his powers from dehydration? It's like saying a bird can't fly without a nest. This weakness really limits his effectiveness as a hero, especially when you consider that most of the world is covered in water, but most of the crime fighting happens on land. Someone get this man a bottle of water, stat! Number 4 on our list is a bit controversial. It's Wonder Woman, the Amazonian warrior princess. Now this weakness is thankfully a relic of the past, but it's too weird not to mention. In her early days, Wonder Woman would lose all her powers if a man tied her bracelets together. Yeah, you heard that right. Bondage was her kryptonite. This weakness was linked to her creator's interest in the practice, and it played into some pretty outdated gender stereotypes. Thankfully, DC Comics realized how ridiculous and offensive this was and got rid of it. At number 3, we have Green Lantern, the wielder of the most powerful weapon in the universe. But guess what? For a long time, his ring was useless against the color yellow. And even worse, the original Green Lantern, Alan Scott, was weak to wood. A being with the power to create anything he can imagine can be defeated by a banana or a tree branch? That's just bananas. The weakness to yellow was eventually explained as a representation of fear, which is interesting when you consider the psychology of color. Yellow is often associated with happiness and optimism, but it can also represent anxiety and cowardice. Zooming into number 2 is the fastest man alive, the Flash. He can run faster than the speed of light, travel through time, and even vibrate through walls. But here's the catch. In some older comics, if he ran too fast, he could die. It's like saying a car is too fast for its own good. However, this weakness isn't consistently applied anymore. The Flash has become so fast that he's basically outrun his own mortality. Still, it's a pretty ridiculous concept when you think about it. And finally, the number 1 superhero weakness that makes no sense is Superman and Kryptonite. The Man of Steel, who can fly, lift mountains, and move faster than a speeding bullet, is brought to his knees by glowing green rocks from his home planet. It's like being allergic to your own planet. And how is it that every villain seems to have a chunk of kryptonite lying around? It's the most overused and illogical weakness in comic book history. It's also worth noting that there are different colors of kryptonite, each with its own bizarre effect on Superman. Red kryptonite, for example, can cause him to grow extra hair, lose his powers, or even turn into a giant ant. And some people theorize that kryptonite's effects aren't just due to radiation, but because it's infused with the screams of Superman's dying people. Talk about a dark and twisted weakness. So there you have it. Some of the most head-scratching, logic-defying weaknesses in the superhero universe. But the comic book world is full of surprises and debates. If you think these weaknesses are crazy, you should check out my previous video where I explore the top 10 reasons why DC will overtake Marvel. Click the end screen on this video to dive into another controversial comic book topic and let me know what you think in the comments.